I used to think the quiet moments in our house were a kind of peace, but now, looking back, I understand they were only pauses between storms, the stillness that comes when you're holding your breath without realizing it. Even now, sitting in this unfamiliar room with my children asleep only a few feet away, my hands keep shaking. It isn't the cold. It's the memory of how quickly calm could turn into something else, how his voice could change, how the walls themselves seemed to listen. I keep waiting for the sound of his footsteps in the hallway, even though he doesn't know where we are. At least, I hope he doesn't. The woman at the desk downstairs said the shelter doesn't list names publicly, that no one can just walk in. Still, I double-check the lock every hour. My youngest, Lily, keeps waking and asking where we are. I tell her we're safe. I say it softly, hoping I'll start believing it myself. Freedom feels strange. Not bright or triumphant, not the way I used to imagine it when I let myself dream in rare moments. It feels like standing on a frozen lake, listening for cracks. I keep thinking he'll call again. That the next message will say he's found us. My phone buzzes even when it doesn't ring. The phantom vibration has lived in me for years. I turned the device off before we arrived, but I still feel it pulsing against my palm. I remind myself that I am here, the children are here, and he is not. That is supposed to mean something. It wasn't always like this. Or maybe it was, and I just couldn't see it yet. When we met, I was 19 and working evening shifts at a grocery store. He was the one who made me feel visible, like he had been waiting specifically for me. I didn't have anyone else then, not because anything tragic had happened recently, but because everything had happened long before. After my parents passed when I was younger, I bounced from one place to another, never long enough to grow roots. By the time I reached adulthood, I existed quietly, almost anonymously, moving through life like someone afraid to say the wrong thing. He noticed me. That alone felt like a kind of miracle. He used to pick me up after my shift and bring hot coffee, even if it was late. He listened when I spoke, finishing my sentences as if he understood me better than I understood myself. People called it sweet. I thought so too. He was attentive, thoughtful, generous in ways I wasn't used to. Back then, I didn't recognize the thin line between attention and surveillance, between affection and possession. When he asked if I could text him whenever I arrived somewhere, I thought it meant he cared. When he suggested I should stop talking to one of my coworkers because she didn't really get me, I believed he was protecting me. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, my world narrowed. But at the time, narrowing felt like belonging. We married when I was 21. Money was tight, and he didn't approve of the idea of a big ceremony. He said everything we needed was already between us, and I trusted him. I didn't have any family to invite anyway, and the few acquaintances I might have called friends had drifted away by then. He said he liked keeping our life simple, that other people complicated things. I told myself he must be right. What did I know about stable families or communities? My entire life had been movement, uncertainty. He was the first person who made me feel anchored. Our first child, Mason, was born a year later. I believed parenthood would soften him, make him gentler, but instead it amplified something I hadn't fully understood yet. He didn't like the idea of me going back to work. He said a mother's place was at home. He said I didn't need to worry about money, he would handle that. And at first, staying home with a newborn felt like a relief. I knew nothing about raising a child, but I threw myself into it. Mason was colicky and rarely slept, and I spent so many nights rocking him in the dim glow of the hallway light that my eyes blurred. My husband would stand in the doorway sometimes, arms folded, and say I was doing it wrong. When I asked what he meant, he'd sigh, step in, and take over with an air of disappointment, like he was correcting a preventable mistake. By the time our second child, Jonah, arrived, the pattern had tightened. My phone, once a tool to keep the world within reach, became something I guarded carefully. He checked it often, sometimes when I was in the shower, sometimes when I was cooking, always with the explanation that trust meant full transparency. I didn't have anything to hide, so I tried to ignore the discomfort pooling inside me. But each time he scrolled through my messages, I felt a little smaller. Each time he questioned why someone had liked a photo or why an old coworker had commented on a post, I felt myself withdrawing deeper into silence. Our third child, Lily, completed the circle that trapped me. She was unplanned, arriving at a time when I already felt like a shadow of myself. 3 children under 7, no job, no savings, no support network. Everything I had, or thought I had, was tied to him. The house, the bills, the car, the decisions. He reminded me often that without him, I'd have nowhere to go. He didn't say it cruelly, at least not at first. More like a statement of fact, something he believed I needed to understand so I didn't make reckless choices. He would frame it as concern, his voice soft but heavy with meaning. "I just worry you don't realize how hard it would be out there alone." For a long time, I believed him. Not because I thought I was incapable, but because I knew he wasn't entirely wrong. I had no one. No family, no friends. The isolation wasn't sudden, it grew slowly, like frost creeping over a windowpane. By the time I woke up enough to see it, the pattern was already set. I stayed because the children depended on me, and I depended on him, and I couldn't imagine a reality where I disrupted that fragile balance. But something began shifting a couple of years ago. It wasn't dramatic, no single moment of clarity. Just small realizations gathering like dust in corners. I noticed how the children stiffened when his voice deepened. How Mason would glance at me before answering a question, as if checking whether it was safe. How Jonah would whisper when he needed something, because loud noises tended to irritate his father. How Lily would cling to me when she felt tension rising in the room. I started seeing the patterns they had already learned to navigate, the ways they adjusted themselves to stay invisible. And then, one evening, after he criticized the way I folded a stack of laundry, I felt a strange, quiet panic bloom in my chest. Not fear of what he'd do next, but fear of what would happen if nothing ever changed. If my children grew up believing this was normal. If they carried his tone in their own voices someday. For the first time, I let myself think, I need to leave. The thought was terrifying. It felt dangerous just to consider it. What if he found out? What would he say? What would he do? How would I survive? But once the thought existed, it refused to disappear. It echoed through every day, every argument, every moment of silence that used to seem harmless. I didn't know how to start. I didn't even know what leaving meant. All I knew was that the small space inside my chest, the part where I kept hope, had begun to thaw, and with it came a frightening possibility. Maybe the world wasn't as closed to me as he wanted me to believe. That night, as he locked the front door and turned off the lights, I lay in bed next to him, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing, and wondering if he could sense the shift inside me. I wondered if he could tell that for the first time in years, I was thinking of a future that didn't include him. The idea was fragile, barely formed, and yet it scared me more than anything he had ever said. I didn't realize then how long the road ahead would be, or how many times I'd question myself, or how close I'd come to giving up before anything even started. I only knew that something had begun, something small and quiet but impossible to ignore. And just as I finally convinced myself I could keep that thought hidden, he turned to me in the dark and said my name in a way that made my entire body tense. "I know when something's on your mind," he murmured. "You can tell me." I stayed perfectly still, afraid that even my heartbeat might give me away, and whispered, "There's nothing." But he didn't answer. He just kept watching me in the dark. I could feel it. He didn't believe me. For days after that night, I moved carefully, like someone navigating a thin sheet of ice. I tried to behave exactly as I always had, same routines, same tone, same quiet acceptance, but I sensed he was watching me more closely. Maybe he always did and I had just grown more aware. Or maybe he truly felt the shift inside me, the way a person can sense a draft even before they see the open window. I started second-guessing every expression on my face, every pause before I spoke. Even my silence felt dangerous. The children sensed something too. They hovered near me more than usual, especially Mason, who was 8 by then and observant in that careful, cautious way children develop when they learn the rules of the house depend on the mood of one person. He never asked directly, but he watched me with those quiet, questioning eyes that seemed older than his age. I didn't know what he understood, but I knew he understood enough. Life inside the house had a rhythm that didn't belong to me. He set the pace, the tone, the expectations. Breakfast at a certain time, dishes done his way, laundry folded as he preferred, the children kept quiet when he worked from home. If a toy was left out, or a cupboard not shut properly, or a towel hung the wrong direction, he would notice. He didn't raise his voice often, he didn't need to. His disappointment was enough. His tone could flatten me. The children, too. He liked to say he valued order. That chaos stressed him. That he only wanted a peaceful home. But the peace he meant was the kind where nothing moved unless he moved it first. I told myself for years that it wasn't intentional. That he didn't realize how his words affected us. That he was tired, stressed, worn down. And sometimes he was gentle, unexpectedly, confusingly gentle, bringing home small gifts for the kids, cooking dinner on weekends, kissing the top of my head as if the world outside didn't exist. Those moments kept me tethered, made me question whether I was imagining things, whether the tension in my body was my own fault, whether I was overreacting. But underneath all that, something else was growing. A quiet certainty that the life I had built around him was swallowing me whole, and if it swallowed me completely, my children would have no one left to show them another way to live. My first act of rebellion, if I can even call it that, was small, almost laughably so. I signed up for an online survey website. The kind that paid a few dollars at a time. I created the account on my phone while he showered one evening, my hands trembling even though I knew he rarely checked my browsing history. I deleted the confirmation email. I cleared the history anyway. The money I earned at first was barely anything, just enough for small Amazon gift cards or a few dollars deposited into an online balance. But it was the first thing that belonged to me, the first sliver of independence I'd had in years. When I realized that some of these survey sites offered payouts through prepaid cards, I began to see possibilities. If I could earn just a little more, if I could find something flexible, something quiet, something he wouldn't track, maybe I could create a tiny safety net. Money was the chain that kept me tied. Money would have to be the tool that cut it. So I searched. Slowly, carefully, obsessively. I read forums late at night with the brightness on my phone turned as low as possible. I learned which jobs were scams, which ones paid reliably, which ones could be done anonymously or under a different email address. I created a second email. Then a third. I used a name that wasn't mine, not to deceive anyone but to protect myself. I found a website where people hired freelancers for small tasks, transcribing short audio clips, categorizing images, writing tiny product descriptions. None of the jobs paid much, but they didn't require experience, and more importantly, they didn't require time outside the house. The first $10 I earned went to a prepaid card, which I hid behind an old cookbook he never touched. When I held that card in my hand, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and shame. Triumph because it was mine, shame because a part of me believed I was doing something wrong. Not morally wrong, just dangerous. He managed all our bank accounts. When we got married, I surrendered my debit card because he said combining finances made us a team. When the children were born, he insisted on handling everything because he claimed I had enough to worry about. Over the years, I became invisible in our financial life, a dependent, not a partner. I didn't even know the online banking password anymore. That wasn't something he hid. He just never offered it, and I never asked. I didn't realize how completely closed off that made me until I started earning small scraps of money on my own. Meanwhile, the daily tension grew. His questions became more pointed. Who was messaging me? Why did I spend so long in the kitchen the other day? Why didn't I answer him immediately when he called from the grocery store? Each question felt like a test I hadn't prepared for. I learned to keep calm, to make my voice even, to explain myself without seeming defensive. He didn't yell, but his tone could slice through me. And whenever I pushed back even slightly, he'd remind me how much he did for our family, how hard he worked, how little he asked in return. Then he'd add, with a sigh, "I just need you to be honest with me." Honesty, in his vocabulary, meant transparency. Transparency meant control. The children grew more sensitive to the shifts in the air. Mason, especially. He'd take Jonah and Lily to the living room when he sensed tension rising, distracting them with games or books. I knew he shouldn't have to carry that responsibility. He was a child. But he had learned to protect them in the only way he could, by keeping them quiet, by keeping them out of the way, by stepping between them and uncertainty. I saw too much of myself in him. The more I watched my children shrink themselves, the more determined I became. But determination doesn't erase fear. Fear sat beside me every night, whispering warnings. If he found out I was working secretly, he'd assume I was hiding more than money. If he discovered the prepaid cards, the second email, the late-night browsing, he'd say it proved I wasn't trustworthy. I had no illusion that he would react calmly. Still, I kept going. Over the next year, I became skilled in things I once believed were beyond me. I learned basic online transcription. I learned how to navigate freelance job boards without leaving traces. I learned which tasks I could finish quickly while the kids napped or played quietly. I learned how to sound professional in messages, even when my heart pounded. My earnings grew slowly but steadily, from $10 a week to $50, then sometimes more. It wasn't enough to live on, not even close, but it was something. And something was infinitely more than nothing. I opened a hidden bank account online. The bank required no in-person appointment, which felt like another small miracle. I chose paperless statements, disabled notifications, and linked it only to the prepaid cards. Each deposit felt like a step forward, even if the steps were tiny. But small steps come with risks. One afternoon, while the children were at school and Lily was napping on my chest, he came home unexpectedly. He walked into the living room just as I minimized the transcription window. My breath caught in my throat. He asked what I was doing. I said I was reading the news. He didn't look convinced. He stood behind me for a moment too long, watching the screen, and all I could think was, he knows. He knows. He knows. But then Lily stirred, and he stepped away, muttering something about a forgotten file at work. I held my daughter tightly, trying not to shake. That night sleep wouldn't come. Every sound in the house felt amplified. I kept replaying the moment he walked in, wondering if he had noticed the cursor, the layout, anything out of place. Wondering if he would bring it up in the morning. He didn't. But the fear didn't fade. It settled deeper. The next day, while he was at work, I checked my hidden account and saw the small balance glowing there. I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt exposed, like even the numbers on the screen were too loud. That evening, as I made dinner, he leaned against the counter watching me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Not anger. Not suspicion. Something quieter, heavier. "You know," he said softly, "I can always tell when you're keeping something from me." My knife froze mid-chop. "I'm not keeping anything," I whispered. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're not a good liar." My heart thudded painfully, and I felt the tremor in my hands. Then he added, "Just remember, I'm the only one who really understands you." I swallowed hard, the room tilting slightly. Because in that moment, I realized he truly believed it. And I realized how much danger that belief held. After that evening, something inside me shifted again, not the quiet thaw of possibility I'd felt before, but something sharper, more urgent, like a warning bell finally loud enough to cut through the fog I'd lived in for so long. His words stayed with me long after the house grew dark and the children slept. I lay awake, listening to the steady hum of the heater, the faint sound of a car passing outside, and the familiar, suffocating silence I'd once mistaken for peace. I knew then that my small steps weren't enough anymore. I wasn't just preparing for something abstract. I was preparing for survival. I began to approach each day as if I were moving through a maze. My actions had to be deliberate, planned, untraceable. The children became my compass. Their safety determined every choice I made. Mason, with his thoughtful eyes and quiet resilience. Jonah, who loved building things and took apart old toys just to understand how they worked. And little Lily, who clung to my shirt when she felt the slightest shift in my breathing. They were the reason I stayed for so long, and now they were the reason I had to leave. My hidden income became more consistent. I learned to take on slightly larger tasks, short articles, product descriptions, even basic proofreading for small businesses that found me through job boards. I created a portfolio under a different name. It felt strange, pretending to be someone else, but it was also liberating. That other name wasn't trapped. She wasn't watched. She wasn't shrinking herself to fit into the narrow space she'd been given. She could say no. She could make choices. Sometimes, when I wrote under that name, I felt a spark of the person I might have become if life had unfolded differently. But those moments were fleeting, and I always shut them down quickly. Hope was dangerous. Hope made you careless. And I couldn't afford that. I saved every dollar I earned. I transferred small amounts from the prepaid cards to the hidden account. I learned how much a cheap motel costs per night. How much the bus fare was to the nearest city with a shelter. How to request copies of birth certificates without raising suspicion. I stored every scanned document in a hidden cloud folder and printed a single set at the library near the children's school, sliding the papers between the pages of an old children's book we never read anymore. It took months to assemble everything: birth certificates, social security cards, school records, vaccination papers. His wallet held most of the originals, locked away in a drawer he considered too important for me to access. But I learned which days he came home earlier, which days he stayed late, which days he forgot to check the drawer after using it. I never took more than one document at a time. I scanned them quickly, returned them, and kept my heartbeat steady even when I felt like it might burst. The fear of being caught never left me. It was in every step I took. Every click of a mouse. Every moment alone in the house. But fear had changed its shape. It no longer froze me, it guided me. The children sensed the shift again. Sometimes Mason would find me staring at nothing, lost in planning, and he'd touch my hand and ask if I was tired. Jonah started sleeping beside Lily more often, as if he felt the air tightening around us. I didn't tell them anything yet. I didn't dare. Children talk without meaning to. They slip truths into ordinary conversations. I couldn't put that on them. But I began planting seeds. Little lessons disguised as casual comments. If I ever tell you we need to leave quickly, you listen to my voice and stay close. If someone says something scary, you don't answer, just come find me. If I say it's time to go, you grab your shoes, even if you don't understand why. The older two nodded solemnly. Lily didn't understand, but she copied their expressions, and that was enough for now. Every night, I imagined different scenarios. How to leave if he was at work. How to leave if he came home early. How to leave if the children were scattered across the house. I rehearsed every step until the routine felt like muscle memory. One afternoon, while he was in the shower, I tested the process for the first time. Not fully, just the beginning. I told the children to pretend we were going to Grandma's house, even though they had no grandmother. They didn't question it, imagination came naturally to them. I guided them through gathering a few essentials quickly and quietly. I timed them. Mason finished first, Jonah a minute later, and Lily struggled with her shoes but tried so hard it broke my heart. When we finished, I congratulated them on their game. They smiled, unaware of the desperate truth hidden beneath it. At night, I packed a small bag for each child. Nothing that would draw suspicion, a few clothes, toothbrushes, Lily's favorite stuffed lamb with the worn pink ribbon. I kept the bags hidden in the trunk of the car in a cardboard box labeled winter decorations. He never looked inside. For myself, I packed almost nothing, just documents, a change of clothes, and the prepaid cards. I didn't want to risk him finding anything unusual in the closet. It was during this stage of planning that I almost got caught. I was in the bedroom one morning, sorting through a stack of old mail to find an envelope sturdy enough to store spare copies of the children's medical papers. I kept the documents hidden beneath a loose floorboard under the dresser, a spot I discovered years ago but never used until now. As I lifted the board, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Too close. Too soon. He wasn't supposed to be home. Panicking would have ruined everything. Instead, muscle memory took over. I dropped the board into place, slid the papers beneath the bed, and picked up a random sweater just as he opened the door. He looked at me, then at the room, then back at me again. "What are you doing?" My voice came out steady, miraculously steady. "Looking for this sweater. I thought I put it in the wrong drawer." He studied me for a long moment, suspicion clouding his expression. I forced myself to breathe normally. Eventually he nodded, though not convincingly, and left the room without a word. When the door shut behind him, I collapsed onto the bed, trembling so violently I had to grip the blanket to steady myself. I knew then that the timeline needed to accelerate. Each day I remained increased the risk. It wasn't just fear of him finding the documents. It was fear of what might happen if his control slipped further. He had started making comments lately, strange, unsettling comments. Asking why I seemed distracted. Why I wasn't as affectionate. Why I spent so much time in the children's room at night. He asked if I was unhappy, but not in a gentle way, in a way that suggested being unhappy was a betrayal. One evening, after a particularly tense moment at dinner when Jonah spilled a cup of water and froze in panic, I finally allowed myself to consider the unthinkable, leaving without everything being perfectly prepared. I had wanted more money saved, more certainty, more stability. But waiting for perfect conditions meant risking losing the chance entirely. And then, one night, something small pushed everything over the edge. The children had gone to bed. The house was dim. I was cleaning the kitchen when he walked in, unusually quiet. He didn't look angry. He didn't look tense. He looked blank. As if some internal switch had flipped off. "You've been distant," he said. My hands froze on the countertop. "You think I don't notice, but I do. You're hiding something." My pulse hammered in my ears. "I'm not hiding anything." He stepped closer, not touching me, but close enough that I could feel the heat of his presence. "I know when things change. I always know." I wanted to step back, but I stayed still. Any movement might be interpreted as guilt. Then he said something that chilled me deeper than anything he had said before. "If I ever found out you were planning to leave..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. His silence filled in the rest. And then he turned away and walked upstairs, as if nothing had happened. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the doorway where he had disappeared. I knew, with absolute clarity, that the time had come. There was no more waiting. No more steps left to plan. No more safety and caution. I had to leave. Soon. Maybe the next week. Maybe the next day. Maybe. A sudden vibration from my phone startled me. A message from an unknown number appeared on the lock screen, one I had set up through the support group I joined under that other name. It read, "You have a place when you're ready. Just one word, and we'll send the address." I stared at it, my heart pounding, fingers trembling. And then I heard footsteps upstairs. Coming down. Coming closer. When I heard his footsteps coming down the stairs that night, the message still glowing on my lock screen, every nerve in my body tightened. I flipped the phone face down on the counter and tried to steady my breathing. He walked into the kitchen, glanced at me, then at the room around us, his eyes sharp in that quiet way that always made my stomach tighten. For a moment I thought he had somehow seen the message, but he only reached for a glass of water, drank half of it, and set it down with slow deliberation. "You're awake later than usual," he said. I couldn't sleep. He studied me again. I kept my face neutral, my posture relaxed, my heartbeat thunderous. After a long pause, he nodded once and walked back upstairs. I waited until I heard the bedroom door close before picking up the phone again. The message was still there. It felt like a lifeline, and a countdown. I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay in bed beside him, staring into the dark, feeling the weight of his breathing beside me. Every rise and fall of his chest reminded me how close he was, how easily everything could fall apart if he woke up at the wrong moment, or caught a detail out of place. But exhaustion never came. My mind raced through every step I'd prepared for months. The bags, the documents, the hidden account, the shelter's message, the route to the car. By dawn, a decision had solidified inside me with terrifying clarity. I would leave tomorrow. Not next week. Tomorrow. Waiting any longer felt like gambling with time I no longer had. The children's safety depended on action, not patience. And after his comment the night before, if I ever found out you were planning to leave, there was no more room for uncertainty. The next day unfolded with surreal calm. He left for work as usual, kissing the tops of the children's heads, his touch lingering on my shoulder just long enough to unsettle me. I smiled, the same practiced smile I'd worn for years, and waved as he pulled out of the driveway. Only when the car disappeared down the road did my breath release in a shudder. I gathered the children in the living room. I told them we were going to take a trip tomorrow. Not to a relative's house, not to a vacation, but to a place where we'll all feel better for a while. Mason's brows knit together. Jonah asked if it was far. Lily asked if she could bring her lamb. I told them yes. I kept my voice steady, gentle, but inside fear surged like a storm tide. The rest of the day became a quiet choreography of preparation. While the kids played in the backyard, I checked the bags in the trunk, making small adjustments, adding snacks, extra socks, Lily's favorite hair clips. I slid an envelope of documents into the lining of my jacket. I hid the prepaid cards in a tiny pocket of my purse. Every detail mattered. In the afternoon, I drove to the school to drop off a form for Mason's class. Really, I needed the short moment in the parking lot to text the shelter. Tomorrow. Within minutes, they replied with instructions and an address. A woman named Sarah would meet us at the back entrance of the building. She told me not to bring anything heavy, not to worry about questions, not to open the door if I felt unsafe. Her calm, clear messages steadied me. When I came home, I made dinner the way I always did. He arrived on time, set his briefcase on the table, and kissed my cheek. I felt the familiar tension travel through my body at his touch. Mason looked at me, as though checking whether something was wrong. I forced my shoulders to relax. I laughed at Jonah's story about a cardboard fort. I helped Lily draw a crooked butterfly. I moved through the evening as if acting out a role I had studied for years. After the children were asleep, I went into the kitchen under the pretense of cleaning. I stared at the clock on the stove, 9:42 p.m., and checked the lock on the back door again. He was in the living room, scrolling through his phone, occasionally glancing at me. I felt the weight of his gaze even when he wasn't looking. When we went to bed, he pulled me close in that automatic way that wasn't affection anymore, just habit mixed with possession. I lay stiff in his arms, counting the hours until morning. I didn't sleep. I listened to the ticking of the clock on his nightstand, each second a reminder that I was getting closer to the moment everything would change. Dawn arrived quietly. As soon as the alarm on his phone buzzed, he groaned, dressed, and left the room. I listened to him make coffee, gather his keys, and step outside. He always paused before locking the door, checking his pockets, making sure everything was in place. When I heard the click of the lock and the rumble of the car starting, my lungs released air I didn't know I'd been holding. This was it. I went to the children's room gently, waking them one by one. Mason sat up immediately, sensing the seriousness in my voice. Jonah rubbed his eyes but obeyed quickly. Lily was confused and sleepy, clutching her lamb, but she let me lift her into my arms. "We're going now," I whispered. Stay close. Quiet voices. They nodded, solemn and trusting. We left through the back door, stepping into the cool morning air. My hands shook as I locked it behind us, though I knew the lock didn't matter anymore. The car waited in the driveway exactly as I'd left it. I strapped the children in, started the engine, and pulled away from the house without looking back. The drive was quiet. Mason stared out the window, deep in thought. Jonah hummed softly to himself. Lily fell asleep almost instantly. I took the side roads, avoiding the main route where he might notice me. Every car behind us felt like a threat. Every red light made my pulse pound. An hour later, we reached the address. The building was unremarkable, brick, aging, with a back entrance shielded by a tall fence. I parked and gathered the bags, guiding the children inside. Sarah met us at the door, her expression gentle but alert. She ushered us in quickly, locking the door behind us. She spoke softly to the children, made them hot chocolate, and showed them a room with bunk beds and warm blankets. I felt myself unraveling the moment they were safe inside. My legs trembled. My hands wouldn't still. For the first time in years, I was out from under his roof, and the weight of that realization struck me so fiercely I had to grip the edge of a table to stay upright. Sarah put a hand on my shoulder. "You're safe now," she said. I believed her for half a second. Then my phone, which I had turned back on only minutes earlier, lit up with a storm of notifications. 10 missed calls. 4 voicemails. 7 messages. My breath caught. The most recent message appeared on the screen as Sarah glanced over. It read, "Where are you? The house is empty." Then another. "You need to answer me. Now." And then, "If you think you can run." The message cut off there, but I didn't need to read the rest. My chest tightened so painfully I thought I might collapse. Sarah gently took the phone from my shaking hand. "We're going to the police. Right now." I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. The children watched me from across the room, small worried faces peeking over their cups of hot chocolate. Then the phone buzzed again. A new message. Sarah stared at the screen and her expression changed. Even she looked unsettled. She turned it toward me. And when I saw what he had written, all the blood drained from my face. The words on the screen blurred before I could fully process them. My pulse hammered in my ears as I stared at the message he had sent, the short, chilling line that made the room tilt around me. "You can't hide from someone who knows you better than you know yourself." It wasn't a threat in the conventional sense. It was worse. It was a declaration of certainty, of ownership, of inevitability. It was the kind of message meant to shake the ground beneath my feet, to make me doubt every step I had taken to break free. A part of me wanted to crumble under the weight of it. Another part, the part that had spent years shrinking, bending, trying to survive in silence, rose up quietly inside me. Not with rage. Not with confidence. Just with a fragile determination that felt new and untested but real. Sarah squeezed my arm gently. "This is intimidation. The police will document it." I nodded, unable to speak. My throat felt too tight. She gathered the children quickly, ushering them toward the shelter's van while I tried to focus on my breathing. Mason slipped his hand into mine as we walked outside, his small fingers warm and steady. "Mom," he whispered, "we're going to be okay, right?" His voice trembled just enough that I felt something inside me crack. I bent down, touched his cheek, and nodded. "Yes. We're going to be okay." I didn't feel sure. But he needed to hear it. And maybe I needed to say it. The police station was bright and cold, the kind of place where everything felt too loud and too exposed. An officer guided us to a private room. Sarah spoke first, explaining the situation with practiced clarity. I handed over my phone, my documents, the screenshots of messages I had saved. They asked questions: how long things had been this way, whether he had ever directly threatened harm, whether I felt safe returning home. I answered as honestly as I could, though the truth felt tangled inside me. Safety wasn't a simple yes or no. Safety had become a shifting landscape, something I never fully reached even now. While the officer typed, the children sat together on a small couch. Lily curled into Jonah's side, her lamb pressed under her chin. Mason watched the door, alert and tense, as if guarding us. I wished they didn't know this kind of vigilance. I wished I could give them a childhood with softer edges. The officer finished documenting the evidence and explained the next steps: temporary protective order, instructions for what to do if he attempted contact, resources for emergency housing, legal advocates who could help with custody and support. The words washed over me in a wave. I tried to absorb them, but part of me still felt suspended in the moment before everything changed, as if my mind hadn't fully caught up with the reality of being out. When we returned to the shelter, our room felt different. Not exactly safe, not yet, but like a place where safety might be possible. The walls were blank. The mattress was thin. But the air didn't feel heavy. No footsteps thudded down the hall with intent. No voice called my name in a tone that made me brace myself. The silence wasn't frightening, it was open. The children settled quickly. Jonah asked if the bunk beds meant we could stay for a while. Mason asked if they had books. Lily fell asleep mid-sentence, still clutching her lamb. I sat on the lower bunk long after they slept, my hands clasped together, staring at the shadows on the wall. I expected relief to wash over me the moment we left the house. Instead, I felt something more complicated, a mixture of exhaustion, fear, grief, and something else I struggled to name. Maybe it was the realization that leaving didn't solve everything. There was still paperwork, custody hearings, court dates, finding a job, finding a home, enrolling the children in new schools. There were still his messages, his calls, his attempts to reach through every boundary I tried to build. There was still the fear of running into him somewhere, or hearing his car outside, or seeing his name on my screen. But beneath all that, under the layers of fear and doubt, something small and fragile flickered. Possibility. In the days that followed, I learned how exhausting freedom could be. Not because of the responsibilities, but because of the emotional weight that came with realizing how much I had carried for so long. The shelter staff helped me apply for assistance programs. Sarah connected me with a legal advocate who explained the process of requesting a long-term protective order. I filled out forms until my hand cramped. I wrote statements about things I had spent years convincing myself weren't serious enough to mention. I sat through meetings that made every part of me ache with the slow, painful process of telling the truth out loud. The children adjusted in their own ways. Mason became quiet, watchful, asking detailed questions about what would happen next. Jonah became clingier, always wanting to be near me. Lily asked repeatedly when we were going home, not understanding that home was something we were rebuilding from the ground up. But there were small victories too. Mason laughed one afternoon, really laughed, over a board game another child at the shelter showed him. Jonah drew a picture of our family, all four of us standing under a sun that took up half the page. Lily slept through the night without waking once. The first time I heard myself laugh again, soft, brief, but real, I felt startled, as if the sound came from someone else. A week passed before the court granted the temporary protective order. The officer handed me the paperwork with firm reassurance. "This is legally binding," he said. "If he contacts you again, we act immediately." Even hearing those words didn't fully quiet the fear, but they gave it boundaries. They made it easier to breathe. I found a part-time remote job doing some of the same small tasks I had built skills for during those secret years: transcribing, writing short descriptions, editing simple documents. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And earning money in the open, without hiding, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. We moved into a transitional apartment after 2 weeks, just one small room with a kitchenette and a bathroom. But it felt enormous compared to the space inside his house where every corner had once felt monitored. The children celebrated by sitting on the floor and declaring it our castle. I didn't correct them. In its own fragile way, it was one. Each day, I learned something new about living outside his reach. How to make decisions without fear of them being questioned. How to choose groceries based on my preferences, not his. How to let silence fill a room without waiting for the sound of anger. How to let the children make noise without flinching. But healing wasn't straightforward. Nights were the hardest. I still woke at times expecting to hear footsteps in the hallway. I still checked the lock twice before bed. I still felt a rush of cold panic whenever my phone buzzed. During one such night, unable to sleep, I sat by the window and watched a streetlight flicker. The children were asleep in their new bunk beds, breathing softly in unison. I thought about the version of myself who had sat in the dark beside him for years, believing she had no options. Believing escape was a fantasy. Believing she wasn't capable of more. If I could speak to her now, I wouldn't tell her she was strong or brave. I would tell her something simpler, that there would come a day when she would choose herself, and her children, even if she didn't know how at the time. That the choice wouldn't happen all at once. It would happen slowly, over years, in hidden steps and quiet realizations, in the moments she finally admitted to herself that the life she lived wasn't the life she wanted for them. Freedom wasn't loud. It wasn't triumphant. It was a quiet thing, a fragile thing, something that grew slowly and needed care. A month after we left, I received an email, not from him, but from the legal advocate, confirming the hearing date for the long-term protective order. Reading it made my hands shake, but I breathed through it. I had people now. I had support. I wasn't navigating everything alone anymore. And when I turned to look at my children sleeping peacefully, I realized something else too. I was beginning to trust myself. Not completely. Not easily. But enough to know that the road ahead, while long and uncertain, was ours to walk. Not mine alone. Ours. As I stood there, a soft breeze drifted through the slightly open window, carrying the sound of distant traffic and something else I hadn't heard in years, a sense of open possibility, small but steady, like the first light before dawn. And for the first time since leaving, I didn't feel like I was running. I felt like I was beginning.